Shabbat Shalom and Gamar Chatima Tova. Getting there. All right, let's start off with an easy question. Abraham. Where is Abraham buried? This is the easy one, folks. Come on, don't be shy. The cave of Machpelah. Very good, which is in the city of Hebron, right? Modern day Hebron, same place, and there's even a very clear marker for it. His son Isaac, where is he buried? Same place. Excellent job. All right. And was it hard to bury them there? Any tricks, any problems, any issues? Well, he had to buy the place first, but he bought it for Sarah. By the time he was passing, and then certainly by the time Isaac was passing, there was very clear title, and there were no major issues. Isaac's son Jacob, on the other hand, where did he die? In Egypt. Where was he buried? In Machpelah, in Hebron. Very good. Any trouble along the way? Because after all, Egypt and Israel are not exactly, well, they are next door geographically, but not if you're trying to transport somebody. Slight delay. Joseph had to get permission to be able to leave the country, but it worked out okay in the end. And Joseph himself, where did he die? Excellent. And where was he buried? Not the same place. Not the place. He was buried in Shechem. Shechem, which is in Israel, is the place that Jacob had first settled upon returning back to the land of Israel, and where, according to the book of Joshua, he had purchased a plot of land before everything went terrible with the people of Shechem and the incident with his daughter Dinah, who was attacked. So Joseph eventually is buried there, but that eventually is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, because Joseph died in Egypt and was essentially preserved, maybe mummification, not 100% sure, but preserved there in Egypt. Certainly he was buried-ish in Egypt and had to wait until someone transported him. And that famous someone, of course, is Moses. When all the other Israelites were getting ready to leave Egypt, Moses remembered the promise that had been given to Joseph that when we left, we would take his remains with us. And so Joseph traveled with the people of Israel all the way through the wilderness until finally in the days of Joshua, having crossed over the Jordan River, he was able to be properly buried in Israel in the city of Shechem. Everybody following this so far? Good. Now we get to the hard one. Where is Moses buried? We don't know. What do you mean we don't know? We get told where he gets buried in the Tanakh. I just told you where Abraham was buried, and you all seem to have no problem with that. I told you where Isaac was buried. I told you where Joseph and Jacob were buried. Why don't you know where Moses is buried? What does the Torah actually tell us about where he was buried? And we all accept that we don't know. Have you not been paying attention? I'll give you a hint. You can look for it in next week's Torah portion and in Vizot HaBracha at the very end of the Torah. And I'll also point out that if you look at both of those passages, chapter 32 and 34, you will find that Moses is buried in the valley and at the top of the hill. We get two versions of where Moses is buried. One says that he is buried on the top of the hill of Nebo, and then we are also told that he is buried in a valley. Now, I don't know about you. I'm not an official geographer, but I'm pretty sure that valleys and hills are two opposite things. How can Moses be buried in two places at once? And indeed, a Roman emperor, according to Sifrei, the great Midrashic collection, set out to figure out where Moses was actually buried. So he sent 2 legions of troops to the area described in the Torah and said, figure out where this guy is buried. Romans were practical, if not always moral. And the legions got to the valley and they looked up at the top of the hill and they could see that that was the burial site of Moses. And so they all trumped up that hill and they got to the top and they looked around and they couldn't find anything. And they looked back in the valley and there's his burial site, there in the valley. And they trump back down to the bottom of the valley, and they look around, and they can't see anything, and it's up on the hill again. So, being logical Romans, without a moral compass, they split the two troops up and say, okay, one troop goes up, one troop stays here, and now we're going to figure out where this guy is buried once and for all. So, one troop schleps back up the hill, probably really unhappy that they were the ones chosen for that job. And when they get to the top, they see nothing, and they look down the valley, and they can see the burial site right there where the other troop is standing. And the troop down in the valley don't see anything, but when they look up, they can see the burial site at the top of the hill. We don't know where Moses is buried by design. We don't know. It is mentioned with as much specificity as where Joseph is buried, and yet we consider ourselves to be in the dark of where Moses is buried because the Torah explicitly tells us we don't know, which is why the Midrash is necessary, because how else can we explain why we don't know for Moses when we do know for other figures who are given the same amount of detail? But there is a deeper question than where exactly he is buried, than where we know he is not buried. He is not buried in Israel. He is not buried in Israel. And this has bugged me for some time. Right? Moses didn't get to go into Israel leading the Jewish people. We all know that. Very, very famous. Moses was no longer allowed to lead the Jewish people across the threshold into the land of Israel. Moses himself complains about this repeatedly to God and to the people whom he blames. I don't get to go into the land of Israel because it's all your fault. And he is really not mincing words when he goes into his lament about this issue. And he is kind of right, in many different ways at least. If the people hadn't messed up with the issue with the spies, they would have already been in the land of Israel 38 years ago. So, that probably would have helped his odds. And if they hadn't been kvetching right after his sister died about no water, maybe he wouldn't have messed up with the whole rock incident, and then he could have gotten to go into Israel even when he was already 120. So he's kind of right. It's our fault that he didn't get to lead us into the land of Israel. There's also some issues of whether or not it was time for a change of leadership, which was sort of what that whole rock incident showed, that he was still using 40 years ago ideology to try and lead the next generation. And it turns out different generations need different leaders. But why not carry his bones? Why not carry his body across the threshold? Fine, Moses. He's not able to be our leader anymore. There's so many problems with that. Being, prophet emeritus would be really hard for Joshua to deal with, as everyone would still be looking to Moses. But the man's dead. Just let him at least be buried in the land that he has worked so hard to create. Not allowing him to be buried there would be like not allowing Theodor Herzl to be buried in the land of Israel in the modern days. Just get across. You're already carrying Joseph's bones. What's one more body to make the trek across? Why not let him be buried in the land of Israel? Well, there are a couple of different explanations that we can come up with. The first and easiest is, well, Abraham had a place to be buried because he had bought it. And that was good for his son, and it was also good for Jacob. And of course, Jacob had bought a plot that Joseph could be buried at. Moses was not part of the allocation of land, right? Because he was one of the generation who would not step across that threshold into Israel. He was not there for the lottery of how the land would be divided. He was not there for it to be apportioned, which meant legally he had no entitlement to any piece of land in the land of Israel that could take up his burial spot. He would be literally robbing someone else of their land. Now, this is a little bit of a thin argument because who wouldn't want Moses buried on their portion, right? Please, I've got plenty of acreage. Moses can be buried right here. I've got no problem with it. So it might have been a technicality, but it's not one that I think that would have really been a problem for the people. But can we imagine other issues that might have arisen with Moses being buried in the land of Israel and with a nice, well-marked gravesite? I see some nods. What do you got?
Well, for the obvious reason, we don't want to create a shrine to Moses, and we don't want people praying to Moses.
All right. If we bury him in the land of Israel, right smack within the land where we all inhabit, someone's going to build a shrine there, if only out of a sense of respect. I mean, after all, when you go to Hebron, and may it be God's will that we can do that peacefully someday soon, you will find a huge building over where Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the other associated people are buried. And it's kind of impressive. Well, doesn't that mean it wouldn't have been a problem if there had been one like that for Moses? If we can build a beautiful building for Abraham with no harm done, why not for Moses? We can build a beautiful place up in Tiberias for Rambam, no harm done. We can have the entire cemetery in Israel with all of the greats that are there from the establishment of the modern state of Israel. And it can look a little shrine-ish. We didn't seem to think there was a problem there. What makes Moses so different that people might have made his tomb different than someone else's? So one more lenient answer is if you take them into Israel, we're going to be held to a higher standard. And that means God's going to punish us too much. But I will say Moses was a big advocate of God not holding us to too high of a standard. Moses was always our advocate. In fact, I could easily imagine us praying to Moses to intercede on our behalf between us and God. Moses, please, God is angry and is withholding the rain. Please, Moses, work your magic once more. What's that? That is exactly the problem, or at least it is one of the problems, because there is a whole list of the problems. So one of those problems would be that not just that they would build a shrine, but that shrine would become a focal point of worship. That people would come first to seek Moses' assistance, that they would see this as being a place where miracles could get started. Because after all, the power of Moses' spirit surely will work on behalf of us who are going through whatever trouble it is that we are going to. And indeed, we see people doing this even to this day. There are people who will go and pray to the various cemeteries and grave markers of what they consider to be saintly figures within the Jewish people. This is not really long-term mainstream, but it is something that has become more and more prevalent over the last couple centuries. And there are many of us who scratch our heads and say, asking somebody dead at their graveside to intercede on your behalf sounds like you're missing the point that God told us we are in direct connection with God, each one of us. And we don't need someone else to be Jewish for us. We don't need someone else to manipulate the divine affluence on our behalf. That's our job, to reach out and connect to God directly. And if you have this kind of tomb worship, then you are in very great danger of not just using it as an intercession, but of turning it into actual worship. Indeed, this is precisely the path towards idolatry that Rambam in Mishnah Torah lays out. That at first, everybody knew there was one God, but they also knew God had appointed various forces, what we might call angels over the world, and people took to trying to plead with the angels so that they would work with God to give us whatever we wanted from that angel's domain. And over time, people stopped thinking about the second part. They just pleaded with the angel, and then the angel in their mind became a god, and now there was a god of the river, and god of the forest, and god of the sun, and so on. And so too, we would have ended up with Moses, the god of fill in the blank of whatever he would have been labeled as, along with other people who came. David, god of war. Who knows where we would have ended up, but it certainly wouldn't have been here. But there was another problem as well. Even if we had imagined ourselves capable of resisting that temptation to see Moses as an intercessor or as a divine being, whose tribe gets this? Who gets Moses in their patch of land? I mean, doesn't everybody want Moses there? Wouldn't it be a site of at least importance, if not veneration or worship, and you would want that there? I mean, we see in the modern world different cities vying for companies to build their headquarters and giving them tax breaks and all sorts of other wonderful free gifts. Who wouldn't want Moses as part of the prestige of their tribe to be there? And you can't give it to his tribe because the Levites don't have any territory. So it's got to be someone else's territory. And as we see from the book of Judges in particular, the tribes aren't always so good at sharing. And they're not always so good at working with each other in a peaceful way. It's one of the reasons why David eventually establishes his capital in Jerusalem, which was kind of like our Washington, D.C., outside the official territory of just one tribe. It's a little more complicated than that, but suffice to say, Jerusalem was not part of the original allocation and therefore was considered a little bit more no man's land and not taking from anyone and not giving to anyone. The tribes would have fought over where Moses would be buried, of who would have the kavod of having his remains placed within their terrain. So it's rather fascinating that Moses complained that he didn't get to go into Israel alive because of the Israelites, that we had messed up his chances by delaying after the spies, by riling him up for decades, and eventually pushing him past the breaking point at the rock. But it turns out he also didn't get buried in the land of Israel because of us, because we couldn't be trusted with it. We couldn't be trusted to not turn it into a shrine, to not turn it into something that we worship, to not turn it into a point of rivalry or of argumentation or of just anger among the different tribes of who got him and who didn't, and whether or not that's fair and whether you're taking proper care of his remains. We ruined the opportunity to be able to properly give Moses at least a rest within the land that he deserved to be in. It was our fault all along. And I still feel very bitter about that on Moses' behalf. But this is par for the course. So much of Torah is designed because we have not yet reached a level where it is not necessary, where we need the laws and the rules. We need the mitzvot and the structure in order that we will grow to be better people. That we will set aside the temptation to worship or venerate people as though somehow they have a different type of soul than the rest of us. That we will set aside the pettiness of arguing over whose land he gets to be in or whose land is being used in order that he is there. But that we can be compassionate and caring, and we can see with respect each one of us and feel the totality of all of us rather than squabbling like children. But we're not quite there yet. Which is why we still need Torah, which is why we still need Judaism. We have not graduated away from the mitzvot. We are still very much in need of them. They ennoble and enrich our lives, and they have brought us a lot closer than we were in those early generations to being to being people that are worthy of having Moses in our midst in some form. The next time you're tempted to be petty, to think someone else can do Judaism for you, to think that you don't have to do this or someone else should be doing that, or to shake your fist in anger at other Jews because they're all doing it the wrong way and I'm the only right one. Realize that that's exactly the kind of thinking that kept Moses out of Israel alive and dead. We have the opportunity and we have the capacity to do better. It's a new year. Let's do better. Shabbat Shalom and Gamar Chatima Tova.